Hello, 안녕하세요, konnichiwa everybody, welcome back to my channel. Today we're doing something different. We are in conversation with past me, and we're talking about should you learn Korean or Japanese? I filmed this footage a year and a half ago answering this question. Today I'm gonna make this video a little different, like we're gonna be asking past me some questions about should you learn Korean or should you learn Japanese?
皆さんこんにちは久しぶりです 여러분 안녕하세요 오랜만이에요.
Okay, Lindie from the past, could you please tell us what is this question and how are you going to approach answering it?
질문이 뭐냐면 한국어과 일본어 どれを勉強しましょうかっていう質問で自分が勉強したいな言語を選べばもっとやる気ができると思います. 자기 마음에 하고 싶은 아니 공부하고 싶은 언어가 잘 없으면 이유가 없으면 동기부여가 잘 생기지 않아요. 어떻게 그런 이유를 찾아야 하는지 설명해 보도록 하겠습니다.
Okay, now we know people struggle between choosing Korean and Japanese. This is very common. These languages are quite close in proximity and in history as well. But Past Lindie has a few questions that you can ask yourself to help you decide which one to start with. Past Lindie, over to you.
まずは、隣の人を見ましょう。隣に韓国人がいますか? それか日本人がいますか? 네, 주변에 한국인 친구가 많으면 연습할 기회가 많으니까 기회가 많으니까 예, 한국어부터 공부하는 게 추천할게요. 두 번째는 교재. 주변에 한국어 교재 아니면 일본어 교재 뭐가 많아요. 예를 들어서 남아공에서 한글 학교가 있었는데 거기에서 사람들이 가서 한국어 수업을 받을 수 있는데 일본어 학교는 잘 없었어요. 완전 비쌌고 좀 힘들었어요. 그래서 당신의 나라에 어떤 교재나 어떤 수업 그런 거 뭐가 있냐면 일단 보고 쉽게 공부할 수 있는지 알 수 있어요.
Now another thing you can ask yourself is, what do you want to be doing in future? Where do you see yourself in a few years? Visualize yourself with this language and think, what would I look like with this language and what would I look like with that language? So let's go back to Past Lindie and see what can you think about for your future.
その後は、自分の未来を考えてください。例えば私は大学生の時にすごく一生懸命日本で働きたいその気があったんですけど頑張って日本の会社でインターンシップをして、その時の夢は必ず日本で働いていることでした。で、それでたくさん日本語を勉強して韓国語をあんまりその時に勉強しなかったんですけどそちらの夢は何ですか?日本で働きたいですか? 아니메가 好きですか? 아니면 한국 드라마가 좋아서 자막 없이 그런 드라마를 보고 싶으면 그것도 이유고 아니면 한국인 남자친구 아니 여자친구 그런 거 있으면 네, 그것도 이유인 것 같아요. 그 미래에 어떤 언어를 쓰고 싶은지 잘 생각해보고 그것부터 시작하는 건 좋을 것 같습니다. 그런데 동시에 한국어랑 일본어를 공부할 수 있을까요? 제가 보기에는 개인적으로 네, 할 수 있다고 생각합니다. 그런데 하나를 선택하고 조금 중급까지 공부하고 나서 그 언어를 쓰면서 다른 언어를 공부하는 게 추천할 거예요.
Okay, here's the pressing question that some of us have. What if you really want to learn both Korean and Japanese and you've decided, I'm gonna do both? Which one do you start with? Well, there's something you can do called language stacking. And unfortunately, you're just gonna have to decide which one you do first, but don't worry, there is time for both. If you get to an intermediate level in the one language, you can use textbooks and resources to learn the other one through that language. So after I learned Korean for a few years, I started learning Japanese and I used resources written in Korean to learn Japanese. Let's see what Past Lindie has to say on this topic.
9年間8年ぐらい間韓国語を勉強してその後は、日本語を始まりました。で、それで韓国で日本語の教科書を買って韓国の教科書から日本語の言語を 勉強しました。
This is a Korean textbook that is filled with Japanese patterns and sentence structures, and it's themed, and it is just amazing. And because Korean sentence structure is so similar to Japanese, reading the Korean translation and the Japanese one together, your brain doesn't need to jump around and make so many shifts as you would if you were studying through English, for instance. So I will see if I can find this book online and put the link in the description. I'm not sure because I found it in a Korean bookstore and it's been a few years, but let's see. But yeah, this is just an example of a resource that I used, written in one language to learn another one, that is called language stacking.
韓国語あんまり知らない場合は、韓国語で日本語を勉強するのは結構難しいかなと思うんですけど、よく考えなさい。はい。
Very interesting, Lindie. Thank you. All right, so how about comparing the grammar and sentence structure of Korean and Japanese? Which one is easier? Which one should I start with? Let's see. Pass, Lindie, over to you.
Grammatically, the two languages are very similar. The use of particles in Japanese is also the same in Korean. So the concept of using 은는, 이가, or ga, or wo, or 을을, all of those have similar properties. So marking an object, marking a subject. I don't know many other languages that have such particles, so it makes it easier to learn if you study the one and then you want to learn the other one. But I wouldn't say grammatically one language is more difficult than the other.
I see, interesting. Okay, how about pronunciation? Which one is easier?
Spanish and Afrikaans speakers, for example, find it very easy to pronounce Japanese. Generally, Japanese is seen as the language with the easier pronunciation because the letters are generally read as they are pronounced. Whereas in Korean, you'll get complicated things like the e and the a and o. Those are really slight nuances in sound that you'll have to get used to. One word can be written in a few different ways and it's not always pronounced as it is spelled. Like gonip, for example, is a very good example. It's not gotip, it's gonip. So there's an example of tricky pronunciation in Korean. So if you're struggling with pronunciation and you're worried maybe Japanese is an easier start.
Okay. What about the writing system? I've heard that Japanese is so complex. There's multiple alphabets. Is Korean a bit easier? Let's see. Back to you, Lindie.
Script-wise, you may struggle a little bit with Japanese because it has three writing systems. The first one is hiragana, which is the easiest way to write Japanese, and you'll probably be understood if you just use hiragana. But introducing kanji and katakana makes it easier to read sentences because it's not just a whole string of hiragana. You can actually break it up and see where are the verbs and the nouns because those are generally written in kanji. Kanji being Chinese characters. Those stem from Chinese characters, but they are pronounced in Japanese. However, one kanji can have multiple pronunciations. Hon, like book or root, can also be pronounced as moto. So in a surname, Yamamoto, you read it as moto. However, my first time when I met a person with that surname, I thought their surname was Yamahon, and everybody laughed at me. So lots of different ways to say one character, which makes it a bit confusing. And you're obviously going to have to memorize lots of kanji. You can learn hiragana and katakana, but when it comes to kanji, it's going to take a lot more effort. Whereas in Hangul is pretty easy to learn. You can probably learn it in a few hours, have all the characters down, and be able to read it, right? In rare cases, Korea uses Hanja, which is Chinese characters read with a Korean pronunciation. Generally, this is only in newspapers, some academic documents or books, and sometimes on menus to indicate big or small, but it's not very common and you can totally manage in Korea without knowing Hanja. I would say pronunciation-wise, Japanese is easier. Reading and writing, Korean is easier. Grammar, they're the same. So the decision is yours to make.
That is it. Thank you, Pass Lindie, for the information. And thank you guys for sticking with me through this weird format of a video. I didn't want to lose the footage that I had recorded a year and a half ago. So I hope it was useful for you. If you have any more questions about learning Korean or Japanese, please leave a comment. I do have a Korean playlist and a Japanese playlist pack with videos and tips. So please check that out. And if you're looking for resources to learn Korean or Japanese, head over to my website, lindiebuddhist.com, and you will find a whole page full of Korean resources and another one for Japanese resources. Thank you so much for hanging out with me this week, and I will see you guys in the next video. Bye bye!
見てくれてありがとうございます。それで次の動画へ見ましょう。 バイバイ。